Briarwood was the kind of town that rarely made the news. It sat quietly between long highways and empty fields, a place where mornings smelled like fresh bread from the local bakery and evenings were marked by porch lights flickering on one by one. People trusted each other here. They waved at passing cars, left spare keys under flower pots, and believed that danger belonged somewhere far away. That sense of safety was why the night Lily Carter disappeared would be remembered so differently by everyone who lived through it. Lily was 22 years old, full of energy, and known for her kindness. She worked evening shifts at a small roadside diner called Maple Grill, a place where truck drivers stopped for coffee and locals gathered to talk about weather and sports. Lily was the kind of person who remembered orders without writing them down and always asked how your day had been. She dreamed of leaving Briarwood one day, maybe going to college in a bigger city, but for now she was saving money and helping her mother pay bills. On the night she vanished, nothing seemed unusual at first. It was a Thursday, cold but clear, with a thin moon hanging above the town. Lily finished her shift just after 10:30 p.m. She wiped down the counter, tied her red jacket around her waist, and said goodbye to her co-worker. Outside, the air felt sharp against her skin. She pulled her jacket on properly and slipped her headphones over her ears. Lily usually took the bus home, but the last bus of the night only stopped near the old railway bridge, about a 15-minute walk from the diner. Most people avoided that area after dark. The bridge was old, rusty, and surrounded by tall weeds and broken gravel paths. But Lily had walked that route dozens of times before. She believed Briarwood was safe. Everyone did. As Lily walked, she texted her best friend Hannah, complaining about her tired feet and joking about rude customers. Then, about 5 minutes later, she called her instead. Hannah would later say Lily's voice sounded different, tighter, like she was holding her breath. Lily told her she felt like someone was behind her. She laughed nervously, trying to make it sound like nothing, but the fear slipped through her words. Hannah told her to turn around or call the police. Lily said she didn't want to overreact. That phone call ended suddenly. The next morning, Briarwood woke up to flashing lights near the railway bridge. A jogger had found Lily's body in a patch of dirt not far from the tracks. Her headphones were tangled nearby. One shoe was missing. The red jacket she always wore was torn at the sleeve. The police quickly blocked off the area, and word spread faster than anyone could control. By noon, the town was buzzing with shock and fear. Parents kept their children inside. The diner closed early. People whispered theories in grocery store aisles and on front lawns. Some said Lily must have met someone she knew. Others insisted it was a stranger passing through town. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had answers. Police officers worked through the day, taking photos, placing small numbered markers on the ground, and collecting evidence. Near Lily's body, they found a broken wristwatch lying face down in the dirt. The glass was shattered, the strap snapped. A muddy footprint was visible near the edge of the path, deeper than Lily's own footprints, pointing toward the bridge. A torn piece of dark fabric was caught on a rusted nail along the railing. These details were noticed, written down, and photographed. But they did not stand out to the investigators the way something else did. Lily's purse was missing. The missing purse became the center of the investigation almost immediately. To detectives, it suggested robbery. Robbery suggested a certain type of suspect. Someone desperate. Someone with a history. Someone the town could easily fear. By the second day, police attention turned to Mark Evans. Mark was a 30-year-old mechanic who lived on the edge of Briarwood. He had a criminal record from years earlier for petty theft. He was known to drink too much and keep to himself. Some people said they had seen him walking near the railway bridge late at night. Others admitted they weren't sure about the night, but they were sure about Mark. In a town that rarely faced crime, his past made him stand out. When police questioned Mark, he was nervous and confused. He admitted he had been out walking that night but denied seeing Lily. His story had small inconsistencies, the kind that come from fear and exhaustion, but detectives saw them as lies. Mark's shoes were taken for comparison, but they did not match the muddy footprint found near Lily's body. That detail was noted, then quietly pushed aside. Meanwhile, Lily's family struggled to understand what had happened. Her mother sat in the living room, staring at Lily's photos, replaying their lost conversation. Lily had promised to come home early that night. She never did. Her father walked the route Lily had taken, trying to imagine her final moments. Every step felt heavier than the last. Hannah told police about the phone call, about Lily feeling watched. An officer wrote it down, nodded, and moved on. There were no follow-up questions. No effort to trace anyone else who might have been near Lily that night. The idea of a stalker felt complicated. A robbery gone wrong felt simple. Within 48 hours, Mark Evans was arrested and charged with Lily Carter's murder. The town reacted with mixed emotions. Some felt relieved that police had acted quickly. Others felt uneasy but didn't know why. Candlelight vigils were held, flowers placed near the bridge, and Lily's name was spoken with sadness and anger. Mark's name, meanwhile, became something else entirely. He was no longer a person to most people. He was a symbol of fear, a reason Lily was gone. As Mark sat alone in a holding cell, he replayed the night again and again in his mind. He remembered the cold air, the empty streets, the sound of trains far in the distance. He remembered nothing that explained why he was now accused of murder. Every time he tried to speak, his words seemed to sink into silence. Back at the railway bridge, rain washed away some of the remaining traces. The ground dried. The weeds bent back into place. Life slowly returned to normal in Briarwood, or at least a version of normal that included locked doors and cautious glances. But the truth about that night had already been buried beneath assumptions. The broken watch sat untouched in an evidence box. The muddy footprint faded from memory. Hannah's warning echoed only in her own mind. Everyone believed they knew what had happened, yet everyone remembered it differently. And in those differences, the real story waited, unseen, ready to change everything. When Mark Evans was formally charged with the murder of Lily Carter, Briarwood shifted from shock to certainty. People wanted closure, and the arrest gave them something solid to hold on to. The story became simple in the public mind. A young woman was killed, and a man with a troubled past had been caught. For many, the case felt already solved before it ever reached a courtroom. Mark sat in jail awaiting trial as weeks turned into months. The concrete walls of his cell closed in on him, not just physically but mentally. Every sound echoed. Every night, he lay awake listening to distant doors slam and voices fade down the hallway. He wrote letters to his mother, promising her he would come home soon, even though he no longer believed it himself. The town he had lived in all his life now spoke about him as if he were already gone. The prosecution began building their case with confidence. They did not have direct evidence tying Mark to Lily's death, but they had something they believed was just as powerful. They had a story that made sense to them. Mark had a criminal record. He lived alone. He had been near the railway bridge that night. And Lily's purse was missing. Each piece on its own was weak, but together they formed a picture the prosecution believed the jury would accept. Local news outlets followed every development closely. Headlines described Mark as a suspect long before he had been convicted. Old mistakes from his past were pulled into the light and examined as proof of who he was. Very little was said about the evidence that did not fit. The broken watch was mentioned once in an early article, then disappeared from coverage. The muddy footprint was never discussed publicly at all. Lily's family attended every pretrial hearing. Her mother watched Mark from across the courtroom, searching his face for some sign of guilt, some explanation she could understand. Sometimes she thought she saw regret in his eyes. Other times she saw only confusion. The not knowing hurt almost as much as the loss itself. When the trial finally began, the courtroom was packed. People lined the benches, leaning forward, waiting for the truth to unfold. The judge entered, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. The prosecution opened with confidence. They spoke about Lily's bright future and the brutality of her death. They described Mark as a man driven by desperation, someone who saw Lily as an opportunity. They emphasized his past theft charges, suggesting a pattern of behavior. According to them, Mark followed Lily, attempted to rob her, and when she resisted, things turned violent. Witnesses were called one by one. A man claimed he had seen someone who looked like Mark near the bridge that night. When pressed, he admitted it was dark and he was not completely sure, but the damage was done. Another witness said Mark had been acting strangely in the days after Lily's death. Strangely, it turned out, meant quietly. The prosecution presented Mark's movements that night, pointing out small inconsistencies in his statements. They framed these as lies rather than the nervous confusion of someone under intense pressure. Each time Mark shifted in his seat, it seemed to confirm the image they were creating. Then came the evidence. Photos of the crime scene were shown to the jury. Lily's torn jacket, her abandoned headphones, the dark ground beneath the bridge. The broken watch appeared briefly on a screen. It was described as an object found near the body, possibly belonging to Lily or dropped during the struggle. No tests had been conducted on it, but the prosecution brushed past that detail, suggesting it was unimportant. The defense tried to slow things down. Mark's attorney was a tired man with too many cases and too little time. He argued that there was no direct proof Mark had been with Lily that night. He pointed out that no DNA connected Mark to the crime scene. He brought up the muddy footprint, explaining that its size and depth did not match Mark's shoes. The judge listened, then ruled the footprint evidence as irrelevant. The jury would not see the photos or hear further discussion about it. The defense's strongest physical evidence was removed in a single decision. When Hannah took the stand, the room grew tense. She spoke about Lily's phone call, about the fear in her voice, about the feeling of being followed. For a moment, it felt like the trial might turn. But the prosecution quickly challenged her account. They suggested Lily was nervous because it was late and dark. They implied that Hannah's memory was shaped by grief rather than fact. Hannah stepped down from the stand feeling unheard. She glanced at Mark as she passed him and saw tears in his eyes. It frightened her. Not because she thought he was guilty, but because she realized how alone he truly was. As the days passed, the jury absorbed the version of events they were given. They were not told that the footprint matched someone much larger than Mark. They were not told that the watch could have been tested. They were not told that Lily had mentioned being followed for weeks, not just that night. Instead, they were given a clear villain and a clean explanation. The closing arguments sealed Mark's fate. The prosecution spoke about justice, about protecting the town, about making sure Lily's death meant something. They urged the jury to look at the facts as they had presented them. The defense repeated that suspicion was not proof, but his words felt thin against the weight of emotion in the room. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. Lily's mother clasped her hands together. Mark stared straight ahead, his face pale and empty. The verdict was guilty. A quiet sound escaped Lily's mother, somewhere between relief and grief. Mark felt the world tilt. The judge's voice echoed as the sentence was read. Life in prison. Mark was led away in handcuffs, his legs weak beneath him. He looked back once, hoping to see someone who believed him. He did not. Outside the courthouse, people hugged each other. Some cried. Many said justice had been served. The town of Briarwood slowly began to heal, believing the danger had been removed. But for Mark, time froze. Prison was a different kind of silence. Days blurred into each other. Mark replayed the trial over and over in his head, wondering where he had gone wrong, what he could have said differently. He wrote appeals that went unanswered. He spoke to other inmates who told him to accept his fate. But Mark could not. He held on to the truth like a fragile object, afraid that if he let go, it would disappear forever. Lily's case faded from headlines. New stories replaced it. The railway bridge returned to being just another forgotten place. Evidence boxes gathered dust in storage rooms. Files were closed and stacked away. Yet beneath the surface, the case was not truly finished. It had only been buried under certainty and fear. The trial had delivered an ending that felt satisfying, but it was built on assumptions rather than truth. And somewhere, in a box no one bothered to open, the ignored evidence waited for the day someone would finally ask the right questions. 8 years after Lily Carter's murder, the name barely surfaced in Briarwood anymore. New families had moved in. Old businesses had closed. The diner where Lily once worked had been renovated and renamed. To most people, the case belonged to the past, sealed by a conviction and time. But justice is a strange way of resurfacing, often when no one expects it. Detective Sarah Miles arrived in Briarwood on a gray Monday morning, carrying 2 suitcases and a reputation that followed her everywhere. She was known for being quiet, methodical, and deeply uncomfortable with easy answers. Larger departments often considered it difficult because she asked too many questions and trusted paperwork more than people's opinions. To Sarah, a closed case did not always mean a solved one. Her transfer to Briarwood was supposed to be routine. A small-town department, minimal crime, steady hours. But on her third week, while reorganizing old case files in a cramped records room, she found Lily Carter's folder. It was thicker than most. Sarah noticed that immediately. She sat at a metal desk under flickering fluorescent lights and began to read. The initial reports described the crime scene, the missing purse, the quick arrest. Everything was neatly summarized, but something felt off. The timeline moved too fast. Witness statements felt vague. Evidence lists were long, yet explanations were short. Sarah leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. She had seen this before. Cases solved under pressure often carried this same hollow feeling. She turned the page and stopped. There was a reference to a muddy footprint near the body. It included a photograph number and a measurement. Sarah pulled the attached image from the file. The print was deep, wide, and clearly made by a heavy boot. She checked Mark Evans' physical description. He was average height, slim build. The math did not work. Sarah frowned and made note. Next, she found a brief mention of a broken wristwatch recovered at the scene. No lab results were attached. No testing logs. Just a line that read item logged into evidence. That was when Sarah knew the file was not finished. It had simply been abandoned. Over the next few days, Sarah requested access to the physical evidence. The evidence storage room smelled like dust and disinfectant. Boxes were stacked on metal shelves, labeled with dates and case numbers. She located Lily Carter's case box and opened it carefully. Inside, sealed in plastic, was the watch. It was heavier than it looked, with a thick strap and a scratched metal back. Sarah turned it over slowly. It didn't feel like something Lily would wear. According to the file, Lily preferred delicate jewelry. This watch was practical, almost rugged. Sarah sent it to the lab. While waiting for the results, she reviewed old witness statements again. One name appeared repeatedly but never with importance. Hannah Wilson, Lily's best friend. Sarah noticed that Hannah's statement mentioned Lily being followed, not just on the night of her death but for weeks before. That detail had been buried under later notes and never explored. Sarah arranged to meet Hannah. They met at a small cafe on the edge of town. Hannah looked older than her age, her eyes tired in a way that suggested years of unanswered questions. When Sarah explained why she wanted to talk, Hannah's hands began to shake. "I told them," Hannah said quietly. "I told the police everything. They didn't care." Hannah described Lily's fear in detail. The way Lily had changed her routine, the way she checked behind her while walking, the way she joked about it to hide how scared she really was. She talked about the phone call that night, how Lily's voice had dropped, how the call ended too fast. Sarah listened without interrupting. She asked careful questions, letting Hannah speak at her own pace. One detail stood out. Did Lily ever describe the person she thought was following her? Sarah asked. Hannah nodded slowly. She said he wore heavy boots. She could hear them behind her sometimes. Slow steps. Like he wasn't trying to hide. Sarah felt a chill. Heavy boots. The footprint. After the meeting, Sarah returned to the station and requested Mark Evans' shoe records from the original investigation. The file confirmed what she suspected. Mark's shoes had not matched the footprint. The explanation for dismissing that evidence was vague and unsatisfying. Then the lab results came back. The watch had DNA. Not Lily's. Not Mark's. The profile matched a man named Thomas Reed. Sarah stayed at the name on the report, waiting for recognition that never came. She searched the case file for it. Nothing. No interview. No mention. It was as if Thomas Reed did not exist in the investigation at all. Sarah ran his name through databases. Thomas Reed had lived in Briarwood at the time of Lily's murder. He worked as a construction supervisor. His job often required heavy boots. His address placed him less than a mile from the railway bridge. 2 years after Lily's death, Thomas Reed moved out of state. Sarah's heart pounded as she dug deeper. Thomas had no criminal record in Briarwood. He was considered respectable. Married briefly. Quiet. The kind of man people did not look at twice. Sarah requested records from other jurisdictions. It took time, phone calls, and persistence. Eventually, she found something that made her stop breathing. In a town 3 hours away, a woman had gone missing 5 years earlier. She had been walking home from work at night. Her case file mentioned fear of being followed. No suspect was ever charged. The case went cold. Sarah compared timelines, descriptions, patterns. The similarities were impossible to ignore. She brought her findings to her superior. At first, there was resistance. Reopening an old case meant admitting mistakes. It meant paperwork, scrutiny, and possible backlash. But the evidence was undeniable. The case was officially reopened. News spread quickly through Briarwood. Some people were angry. Others were confused. Many refused to believe Mark Evans might be innocent. For years, his guilt had been a comfort, a way to make sense of Lily's death. Mark received the news in prison through a brief conversation with a lawyer. At first, he didn't believe it. Hope had betrayed him too many times. But when he heard about the DNA, about the watch, something shifted inside him. For the first time in years, the truth felt close enough to touch. Sarah continued building the case. She tracked Thomas Reed's movements after leaving Briarwood. He had changed jobs frequently. He had used variations of his name. That alone raised concern. Eventually, she found his current address. Before making contact, Sarah reviewed every piece of ignored evidence again. The torn fabric matched a type of work jacket common in construction. The footprint size matched Thomas perfectly. Phone records placed his phone near the bridge that night, something the original investigators never checked. Each discovery felt like uncovering a buried voice. Sarah visited Lily's parents to explain what she had found. Lily's mother cried, not just from grief, but from anger. Years had been stolen from them. Years of believing the wrong story. As Sarah left their home, she looked back at the quiet street and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was no longer just about solving a crime. It was about correcting a wrong that had been allowed to live for far too long. The file that had once been closed was now wide open, and every page turned revealed a truth that should have been seen from the beginning. The evidence had never been lost. It had simply been ignored. And now, it was finally speaking. When Detective Sarah Miles officially reopened Lily Carter's case, Briarwood felt as though it had been pushed backward in time. Old fears resurfaced. Conversations that had been buried for years returned to dinner tables and sidewalks. People who once spoke with certainty now spoke with hesitation. The town had built its sense of safety on the belief that Lily's killer was locked away. That belief was beginning to crack. Sarah worked quietly but relentlessly. She knew that reopening the case meant more than gathering evidence. It meant challenging a story the town had accepted for nearly a decade. Every step forward came with resistance, not just from within the department, but from the community itself. Some officers avoided the topic. Others questioned why she was digging up the past. Sarah understood their discomfort, but she could not ignore the truth staring back at her from every document and test result. Her first priority was to track down Thomas Reed. Records showed that Thomas had changed addresses several times after leaving Briarwood. His moves followed no clear pattern, almost as if he were intentionally staying just out of reach. Sarah followed the trail patiently, contacting employers, reviewing utility records, and pulling archived phone data. Eventually, she located him living under a slightly altered name in a small town several states away. Before approaching him, Sarah reviewed everything one more time. She needed to be certain. The DNA from the watch was conclusive. The footprint matched his boots. The torn fabric matched the brand of work jacket his company issued. Phone location data placed him near the railway bridge at the exact time Lily disappeared. Each piece fit together with unsettling precision. A warrant was issued. When officers arrived at Thomas Reed's home, he appeared calm, almost too calm. He was older now, heavier, with graying hair and tired eyes. He did not resist arrest. He simply nodded and asked if he could put on his shoes. Heavy boots sat by the door. During the drive back to Briarwood, Thomas said very little. When he did speak, his voice was steady. He claimed he had no idea why police were interested in him. He said he barely remembered Lily Carter. To anyone listening casually, his words might have sounded convincing. Sarah did not challenge him yet. Back in Briarwood, the news of Thomas's arrest spread like wildfire. Shock turned into disbelief. People struggled to connect the image of a quiet construction supervisor with the brutal crime that had haunted the town. Some refused to accept it. Others began to feel a deep, unsettling guilt. Lily's parents were called to the station. When Sarah explained what the evidence showed, Lily's mother sat silently, tears streaming down her face. Her father clenched his fists, anger and grief mixing into something sharp and painful. They had trusted the system. That trust had cost them years of truth. Meanwhile, Mark Evans watched everything unfold from behind prison walls. His lawyer visited him with updates, each one more unbelievable than the last. Mark listened carefully, afraid to hope too much. He had learned that hope could be cruel. But when he heard Thomas Reed's name, something inside him settled. He had never heard that name before. It meant nothing to him. And that, strangely, meant everything. Interrogating Thomas Reed was not easy. In the interview room, he maintained his composure. He denied knowing Lily personally. He claimed he often walked near the railway bridge at night to clear his head. He admitted the watch was his, but said it had been stolen months before Lily's death. He insisted the DNA meant nothing. Sarah listened patiently, letting the silence stretch between his answers. She knew that pressure did not always come from force. Sometimes it came from time. She laid the evidence out slowly. She showed him the phone records placing him near the bridge. She showed him the fiber analysis linking his jacket to the torn fabric found at the scene. She showed him the footprint comparison, the measurements aligning perfectly with his boots. For the first time, Thomas's expression changed. His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the table. Still, he denied everything. It wasn't until Sarah mentioned Hannah's statement that the room shifted. She said Lily knew someone was following her. Sarah said calmly. She described heavy boots. Slow steps. Not trying to hide. Thomas swallowed hard. Sarah pressed on. She spoke about the other missing woman in the neighboring town. The similarities were impossible to dismiss. The same patterns. The same fear. The same timing. The silence grew heavy. Finally, Thomas spoke. He admitted that he had noticed Lily weeks before her death. He said he saw her walking home from work and became interested. At first, he told himself it was harmless. Just watching. Just curiosity. But over time, it became something darker. On the night Lily died, Thomas said he followed her again. When she turned and recognized him, panic took over. She ran. He chased her. He claimed he only wanted to talk, to explain, but fear and anger blurred together. Near the bridge, Lily stumbled. In the struggle, she fought back harder than he expected. He never intended to kill her, he said. But when it was over, she wasn't moving. The broken watch slipped from his wrist during the struggle. He didn't notice until later. By then, it was too late. Thomas confessed. The room felt colder after his words settled. The confession changed everything. Prosecutors moved quickly to vacate Mark Evans' conviction. Evidence that had once been ignored was now undeniable. A judge ordered Mark's immediate release pending formal exoneration. When Mark walked out of prison, he looked thinner, older, and deeply tired. The air outside felt unreal after so many years behind concrete walls. Cameras captured the moment, but Mark barely noticed them. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on his mother. She rushed forward, and for the first time in 8 years, they held each other without bars between them. The town of Briarwood watched in silence. Some people felt shame. Others felt anger toward the system they had trusted so blindly. A few still struggled to accept that they had been wrong. But the truth did not care about comfort. Thomas Reed was charged with Lily Carter's murder and the disappearance of the other woman, whose body was later found based on information he provided. The full scope of his actions began to emerge, revealing a pattern that should have been stopped years earlier. As the case unfolded publicly, questions poured in. How could this have happened? How could so much evidence be ignored? The answer was uncomfortable but simple. The police had focused on a suspect who fit their expectations and stopped looking beyond him. Once Mark was arrested, everything else became noise. Detective Sarah Miles became both praised and criticized. Some called her a hero. Others accused her of stirring trouble. She ignored both. For her, the work was never about recognition. It was about listening to what the evidence had been trying to say all along. Lily Carter's name returned to the headlines, this time accompanied by the truth. Her story was no longer about a robbery gone wrong. It was about being followed, unheard, and failed by a system that chose convenience over care. Briarwood could not undo the past. It could not give Lily her life back or return Mark's stolen years. But it could face what had been done and learn from it. The truth had come back to Briarwood, and it refused to be ignored any longer. The day Mark Evans was officially declared innocent began quietly. There were no sirens, no dramatic announcements over loudspeakers. Instead, the news spread through Briarwood in hushed conversations and stunned phone calls. A judge had reviewed the new evidence, the confession, and the failures of the original investigation. With a steady voice, the court overturned Mark's conviction. 8 years of wrongful imprisonment were erased with a single ruling, though nothing could truly give those years back. Mark stood in a small room at the courthouse, wearing clothes that no longer quite felt like his own. His hands trembled slightly as his lawyer explained what would happen next. Apologies were offered, formal and careful, spoken by people who had never looked him in the eyes before. Mark nodded, not trusting his voice. Relief came in waves, followed by something heavier. Freedom was real, but so was everything he had lost. Outside, rain fell softly, turning the pavement dark and reflective. Mark stepped through the courthouse doors and paused, unsure of how to move forward. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and strangers stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and regret. For years, these same people had seen him as a monster. Now they saw him as a mistake. Mark did not smile. He did not raise his hands or speak about justice. He looked down at the wet ground, took a slow breath, and walked toward his mother. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly, as if afraid he might disappear again. That moment, quiet and human, mattered more than any headline. Briarwood struggled in the days that followed. The town council held emergency meetings. The police department announced internal reviews. Old case files were pulled from storage, the pages yellowed and dusty. Residents argued in grocery stores and online forums. Some demanded accountability. Others insisted that mistakes happen and that reopening wounds would only cause more pain. Lily Carter's parents watched it all from a distance. Their grief had changed shape over the years, settling into something heavy and familiar. Now it shifted again, filled with anger and sorrow intertwined. They had believed the system had given them justice. Learning the truth felt like losing Lily all over again. Detective Sarah Miles visited them often. She listened as they spoke about Lily, about her laughter, her plans, her kindness. She listened as they spoke about the years they spent believing the wrong story. Sarah never offered excuses. She never rushed them. She knew that truth, even when necessary, could be cruel. Thomas Reed's trial moved forward quickly. This time, the evidence spoke clearly and completely. The broken watch, once dismissed, became central. The footprint, once ignored, was displayed in court with precise measurements. Hannah's testimony was no longer brushed aside. She spoke with confidence, her words finally given weight. Thomas pleaded guilty. The courtroom was silent as his sentence was read. Life in prison without parole. No cheers followed. No sense of victory filled the room. There was only a deep, shared understanding of how much damage had been done before the truth arrived. Mark began the difficult process of rebuilding his life. The world outside prison felt louder, faster, and unfamiliar. Simple things overwhelmed him. Crossing busy streets. Choosing what to eat. Sleeping without the echo of locked doors. He attended counseling, trying to understand how to live without constant fear. Some nights, he still woke up convinced he was back in his cell. Job interviews were awkward. Some people recognized him immediately. Others pretended not to. A few offered quiet support. Mark accepted help where he could, pride long since worn down by survival. He did not talk much about prison. He talked about the future instead, even when it felt uncertain. The state issued a formal apology and a financial settlement, but Mark understood that money could not replace time. It could not undo birthdays missed, relationships broken, or the slow erosion of hope. Still, It gave him a chance to start again. Detective Sarah Miles returned to her routine work, but Briarwood was no longer just another assignment. The case followed her, discussed in training sessions and investigative journals. It became an example of how easily truth could be overlooked when assumptions took control. Sarah never claimed she had done anything extraordinary. She insisted she had only listened carefully. The police department implemented new policies. Evidence review procedures changed. Cold cases were reopened. Officers were trained to question their own conclusions. It was not enough to solve crimes quickly. They had to solve them correctly. Hannah stood on the railway bridge one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For years, she had avoided this place, haunted by memories and guilt. She had replayed Lily's last phone call endlessly, wondering if she could have done more. Now, she felt a quiet release. The truth had come out, even if it had taken far too long. The bridge itself had not changed. Rust still clung to its sides. Weeds still pushed through the cracks. But the silence felt different. Less heavy. Less accusing. Lily Carter's story became more than a tragedy. It became a warning. Journalists and documentary filmmakers examined every stage of the case. They asked hard questions. Why was the footprint ignored? Why was the watch never tested? Why was Hannah's statement dismissed? The answers pointed to a system under pressure, eager for closure, willing to trade certainty for speed. The evidence that police ignored had not been hidden. It had been right there, documented, photographed, and stored away. It waited patiently while an innocent man lost 8 years of his life and a killer walked free. That realization unsettled people far beyond Briarwood. Mark and Lily's parents met once, privately, without cameras or reporters. The meeting was emotional and painful. Words failed them at times. There was no perfect way to bridge the gap between their experiences. But there was honesty. And there was understanding that they had all been hurt by the same failure. As time passed, Briarwood slowly found a new sense of balance. It was not the same town it had been before Lily's death, and it never would be. The innocence that once defined it was gone, replaced by awareness. People asked more questions now. They listened more carefully. On the anniversary of Lily's death, a small memorial was held near the bridge. Flowers were placed. Candles flickered in the evening breeze. Mark stood at the edge of the crowd, unseen by most. He watched quietly, honoring a life lost and a truth delayed. He thought about the evidence that had changed everything. A broken watch. A footprint in the mud. A frightened phone call. Ordinary things, easily dismissed. Together, they held the truth all along. Justice, Mark realized, was not just about punishment. It was about attention. It was about taking the time to listen, to question, to doubt even the answers that felt comfortable. As the crowd dispersed and darkness settled over Briarwood, the town felt quieter than it had in years. Not empty, but reflective. The story that had once been built on assumptions had been rewritten by facts. The evidence police ignored had finally been seen. And when it was, it changed everything.